In a small town in Texas, where the dusk draped soft orange light over weathered wooden rooftops, Luke stood by the lake, watching the ripples without a phone in his hand. No texts, no explanations, not a single call. She had disappeared, without a word. But what puzzled her wasn't his silence, it was how he was silent. No blame, no anger, just space. In a world where emotions are often sold like commodities, the stillness of a man is something no one ever teaches women to face. And when that man chooses to step away with peace in his eyes, people start to wonder, how could he let go so easily? Not because he was weak, but because he was tired of bleeding for those who left without looking back. Part 1. She'll fake it. You'll feel it. In New Orleans, at a riverside bar where jazz drifts through the night like breath from the past, a woman named Avery laughed loudly with her friends. Her eyes shimmered under the golden lights, cocktails swirling in hand, and her latest Instagram post was up. Hair down, lips red, caption simple, free. But if you looked closely enough, you'd see something out of tune. Like a melody played half a beat off, Avery was performing. She didn't want anyone to see the emptiness of going home alone. Didn't want anyone to notice how her eyes kept checking her phone, just to see if Luke had watched her story. But he hadn't. No likes, no messages, no gentle check-in. And that, not the breakup, was what she wasn't ready for. You see, a woman will pretend to be strong. She'll post bright pictures, beam radiant smiles, and try to convince the world she's fine. But deep down, the space you used to fill, your attention, your listening, your quiet patience, now echoes louder than ever. Luke, like many men who once loved with everything, used to think silence was weakness. But now he knew, silence isn't emptiness, it's a mirror. And that mirror was forcing Avery to confront the one truth she had long avoided. She didn't just lose a man who loved her, she lost the one who understood her better than she understood herself. And so, no matter how many more pictures she posted, how many parties she went to, or how many cryptic captions she wrote, part of her still hoped, quietly, unconsciously, that he would respond. But he didn't. Because the calm of someone who's been hurt is the one thing no performance can silence for long. Part 2. Your absence becomes the obsession. In the suburbs of Chicago, as winter snow blurred the bedroom window, Avery lay curled up in Luke's old hoodie. She would never admit it to anyone, not even to herself, that she kept it just to breathe in the scent of pine and the faint trace of mint he used after shaving. At first, when Luke didn't text back, she thought she had won. She thought she had the upper hand. She assumed his silence was just a move in the game, that he was trying to prove a point, and he'd be back, just like everyone else. But then a week passed, then 2, then a month. Still nothing. And the strangest part, he didn't block her. He didn't stalk her. He just disappeared, as if he never existed. Yet somehow, it felt like he was still there. A kind of absence that the mind couldn't fill. The human brain hates emptiness, and when there's no information, it starts making up stories. Avery began scrolling through old messages, rereading every word he once wrote. She began to wonder, has he really moved on? Is there someone new? Was I just a mistake to him? She made coffee but didn't drink it. She noticed how unusually quiet her phone had become. No notifications with his name, no familiar chime. And that's when silence, something seemingly harmless, started stealing her sleep. Luke didn't have to create a storm. He just had to disappear. And without him, the emptiness he left behind became the loudest sound in Avery's life. It wasn't indifference. It was the signal of a man who no longer needed to prove anything. He didn't disappear to hurt her. He disappeared to stop hurting himself. And when a man who once loved deeply chooses to fully withdraw, only then does the other person begin to understand. It's not what was said, but the meaningful silence that truly eats you alive. Part 3. She expected you to break first. In San Diego, where gentle waves lapped the golden shore, Luke once sat for hours by the beach, eyes fixed on the horizon, his heart steeped in emotions he hadn't yet found the words for. The day Avery pulled away, he knew. Not because she said it directly, but because she slowly disappeared from conversations that once felt natural. Texts grew shorter, the effort vanished, and the smile she used to wear on FaceTime no longer reached her eyes. She thought he'd break down. She believed she held the strings to his emotions, that when she stepped back, he'd step forward, that when she disappeared, he'd go looking for her. Avery wasn't cruel, but she was used to the game, push and pull, test and guess. She knew how most men reacted, by seeking clarity, by trying to win back affection. They spiral into midnight messages. They plead for explanations, for another chance. But Luke did the one thing she never saw coming. He did nothing. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't send sad songs. He didn't post vague captions. He simply stepped out of the emotional game altogether. And the fact that he didn't collapse the way she had scripted in her head, that's what left her shaken. He didn't crumble. He stayed quiet. He stepped out of the spiral she thought would pull him in. In a world where people measure their worth by who needs them more, a man who chooses peace over explanation renders all strategies useless. And then Avery started to question herself. Did he ever really love me? Or did I misjudge the kind of man he is? But what Luke understood, what many men learn through tears and disappointment, was this. A reaction is not always love. Sometimes silence is the final expression of love. And when you stop, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to walk away from uncertainty, that's when everything shifts. You didn't break. You went still. And in that stillness, every script she had carefully written came undone. Part 4. You refused to feed her ego. In a high-rise apartment in the heart of Manhattan, where the city lights never sleep, Avery sat alone by the window, her phone in hand, not to call, but to check. It had been weeks since the last trace of Luke appeared in her digital world. No messages, no story views, not a single breadcrumb. And what made her angry wasn't that he was angry. It was that he was completely at peace. The emotional game she'd played with men before, go cold so they'd come warm, disappear so they'd chase, it had worked in the past. But not with Luke. Not this time. Because this time the man didn't react. He didn't send a wistful playlist. Didn't write a melancholic status. Didn't ask, "Are you okay?" He just vanished. Not out of anger, but out of dignity. He was no longer the one filling the space she left. No longer the hand ready to reach for hers no matter how many times she pulled away. No longer the emotional life raft she could cling to when her own insecurities swelled. Luke had learned a powerful truth. A truth many men only grasp after bleeding out emotionally. Every time you answer coldness with warmth, you're not repairing the relationship, you're feeding the ego of someone who stopped valuing you. And when you stop feeding that, the entire system collapses. Avery didn't realize that his silence was the clearest sign of self-respect. Because love is not a currency to be traded for the attention of someone who no longer sees your worth. And Luke's silence wasn't a strategy. It was liberation. He didn't do anything to make her feel empty. He simply stopped doing everything that once made her feel special. And now, little by little, she was starting to feel his presence, in the very space where it no longer existed. Part 5. Your peace creates her chaos. In Santa Fe, surrounded by red desert earth, glowing under a twilight sky, Luke spent his time fixing up his father's old pickup truck. Each day, he'd drive along dusty roads, the wind slicing through the air, and he felt, strangely, at peace. No more buzzing notifications, no more trying to decipher cold texts. For the first time in months, he felt still. Meanwhile, in an apartment in Denver, Avery sat before a vanity mirror, the soft glow casting shadows over her carefully done makeup. She was getting ready for a party, but her fingers scrolled through old photos, one in particular. Luke smiling, hands stained with grease, a red flannel draped over his shoulders, a photo he had once sent her during one of their nightly jokes. She thought when she disappeared, he'd spiral. She expected a little chaos, an emotional outburst, a desperate text. But what she got was peace. And for someone used to swimming in emotional turbulence, peace is sometimes the cruelest provocation. Luke didn't yell, didn't beg, didn't try to fix anything. He simply settled. And that calmness, that unwavering stillness, unsettled her to her core. Because for a woman who's mastered the art of emotional control, a man who no longer wavers is the most dangerous kind. Luke didn't prove his value by staying present. He proved it through purposeful absence, through eyes that no longer looked back, through a heart that no longer needed an apology to heal, and that terrified her. He wasn't angry. He didn't need closure. He chose peace, and that peace became a storm in the heart of someone who once believed she held all the control. And so, in that room full of music and glittering lights, Avery heard the most haunting sound of all, herself. Not the ping of a message, not the vibration of a call, just silence. And it echoed like a church bell no one could silence. Part 6. Stillness speaks louder than words. In Portland, Oregon, on a misty morning, with light rain dusting the tree-lined streets, Luke sat in a small corner cafe. He was reading a book, no headphones, no checking his phone. At the next table, a young couple whispered their arguments from time to time, while he quietly lifted his cup of hot Americano, eyes following the raindrops trailing down the foggy glass. He wasn't trying to look okay. He didn't need to post any deep quotes. He just no longer felt the need to explain. Meanwhile, across the country, Avery stared at her phone screen, fingers scrolling through her message history, stopping at his name. 3 weeks. No texts. No online status. Not a single word from him. She once hoped he would write a long paragraph, an explanation, a moment of emotional weakness. She had even been ready to let go of everything, if only he gave her one reason to come back. But what left her unhinged was that there was nothing at all. No words to misinterpret, no sentence to respond to, only stillness. And within that stillness, all the assumptions in her mind began to spiral. Does he still care? Have I been completely erased from his life? What is he thinking? Or is he no longer thinking of me at all? Luke's silence wasn't abandonment. It was a boundary. It said that he no longer needed to be understood, no longer needed to justify himself, no longer needed to prove his worth to someone who no longer saw it. Avery began to miss the things she once overlooked, the way he stayed patient when she was upset, the way he listened when she went quiet, the way he never demanded, but was always there. And now that presence had withdrawn behind a veil of silence she couldn't break through. Luke had learned that sometimes you don't need to speak to be understood. Stillness, if deep enough, speaks everything for you. And for Avery, it was that very stillness that became the most terrifying goodbye. Part 7. Her mask can't hide her regret. At a yoga studio in Venice Beach, California, Avery was posing for a self-healing photo with the sunset glowing behind her. A soft smile on her lips, a dreamy gaze in her eyes, and a short caption, "Peace looks good on me." But no one saw the moment right after, when she quickly looked down at her phone, scrolling through the viewer list. No Luke, no likes. Not even the smallest reaction. That's when the mask began to crack. On the outside, she seemed fine. She still went out, still dressed up, still laughed on cue, and appeared as if she had moved on from it all. But inside, the questions kept gnawing at her, especially at night, when the lights were off and her stories had no more viewers. Why hasn't he come back? Has he ever even thought of me? Am I really that worthless to him now? She wouldn't dare admit to anyone that she was the one who pulled away, that she created the distance, fully believing Luke would circle back like the others always had. But this time he didn't. This time there was no late-night call, no "I miss you" message. Just silence, a kind she couldn't control, couldn't measure, couldn't predict. Luke wasn't trying to hurt her. He just wasn't trying to keep playing a role. And now she was performing alone. She smiled, but no one believed it. She wrote captions, but no one read between the lines. She sought attention from the whole world, except from the one man she truly wished would turn around. But Luke had moved on, not out of spite, but because he no longer needed an ending from someone who walked away without a beginning. She once believed she was strong enough to leave, but now she understood. True strength is when someone walks away in silence and never looks back. Part 8. You became scarce, and scarcity hurts. At a small gas station on the outskirts of Nashville, Luke paused in the middle of a cross-country drive. He poured coffee from an old metal pot, added a touch of brown sugar, then stepped back into his truck under the early autumn sun. His life no longer revolved around anyone. It revolved around himself, the open roads, a growing career, and mornings no longer haunted by the need to prove his worth. He had become scarce, not the strategic kind of silence, but a deep kind of scarcity, no longer easy to reach, no longer easy to read, no longer easy to hold on to. Avery once believed he'd always be there, always responding, always asking how she was, always orbiting. But when the text she never replied to stopped coming altogether, that's when the emptiness began to take shape. She never realized the value of his presence until it disappeared completely. Like tap water in the morning, as long as it flows, no one thinks about it. But when it stops, only then do you realize how much you relied on it. And Luke? He didn't create distance to punish. He simply stopped trying to fill the void someone else had left. She no longer saw him in her stories. No more familiar scene notifications. No more friends mentioning his name in casual conversations. He had vanished from her emotional frequency. And when someone who once comforted, encouraged, and walked beside you becomes a mystery, it doesn't just stir regret. It forces you to reevaluate everything you once had with them. Scarcity doesn't just make us feel the loss, it reveals the mistakes. Now she began to understand. The man who once showed up every single day was never a guarantee. He was a gift, one she spent recklessly and lost forever. Part 9. She remembers what you don't repeat. In Charleston, South Carolina, inside an old house wrapped in oak trees and ivy vines, Luke was cleaning out his study. He gathered old notebooks, a coat that had gotten him through the past winter, and a picture frame that had long been turned face down. There was no resentment in his eyes, only acceptance, a kind of peace that comes from no longer repeating what once hurt you. Meanwhile, at a small nail salon in Savannah, Avery sat waiting, her eyes unconsciously fixed on her phone screen. No messages, no updates, nothing new from Luke. And that very emptiness, no reminders, no signs of care, caused the past to start echoing. Memories don't disappear. They only stay quiet when they're being replaced by the present. And when the present offers nothing to hold on to, Avery was forced to revisit what she once had. The texts he used to send, his deep, gentle voice in old voicemails, his soft gaze in short video clips she still hadn't deleted. She remembered, not because he was trying to make her remember. She remembered because he had stopped reminding her. Luke no longer said, "Good night." No longer asked, "Home yet?" No longer texted, "What did you eat today?" As if it were a natural routine. And the complete ending of that loop made the past stand out, like a red lipstick stain on a white shirt. Because when you stop reminding someone of your presence, all that's left is memory, and how they choose to treat it. Now Avery wasn't just missing what was lost. She regretted not realizing then that repetition too is a form of love. Someone always being there, always steady, always caring without needing anything in return. And now, with Luke no longer even one click away, she realized every gesture she once took for granted was actually something rare. And the pain didn't come from him leaving. The pain came from the fact that he never came back. Part 10. No contact isn't a game, it's growth. In Boulder, Colorado, Luke woke early in a wooden cabin tucked in the mountains. He opened the window to let in the morning light and birdsong. He no longer thought about unsent texts, unspoken words, or the nights spent waiting for someone who no longer made him a priority. He wasn't silent to win. He was silent to heal. Because he had learned something time had taught him, something most only understand after trading away their self-worth too many times. No contact isn't a game. It's a rebirth, not to make her chase, not to appear mysterious, but to bring his heart back to where it belonged, within himself. He no longer needed to be understood, no longer needed an apology, no longer needed someone else to confirm he was enough. Because that silence, once a wound, had become a boundary. Once a reaction had become a rhythm. Once painful had now become power. Avery might think he was avoiding her, might think he was just too proud, but she didn't know about the nights he wrestled with the urge to text, "If you just say one word, I'll stay." And in the end, he never texted. Because growing up isn't about holding on at all costs. It's about learning how to no longer need what never truly loved you. On the other side, Avery kept living, kept smiling, kept pretending she was okay. But in the silence, she couldn't shake the feeling that something precious had passed through her life. Not with a cry, but with a calm nod and no goodbye. Luke was no longer the man who needed closure. He was the closure. And when Avery finally took off the mask, when the outside noise faded, when there was nothing left to post, only one truth remained. She hadn't lost a man out of revenge. She had lost a man who was evolving. A man who chose discipline over reaction, who chose peace over persuasion, who no longer needed to be loved because he had become love within himself. And the most painful part of it all? She knew there would never be another chance to start over. Because he had walked away, not in rage, but in the quiet steps of a man who had finally healed.